The heat of a Texas summer can be unforgiving, the kind of heat that clings to the skin and fills the air with an invisible weight. In July of 2002, that heavy air seemed to wrap itself around the Harris household, though the true suffocation had little to do with the weather and everything to do with what was happening inside. Dr. David Harris and his wife, Dr. Clara Harris, were known as a power couple in Houston's professional community. Both successful dentists, they had built their clinics with hard work and long hours, creating not only a thriving business, but also an image of success and stability. To outsiders, they looked like the American dream. Two attractive professionals, raising a family, driving luxury cars, taking vacations, building their legacy. But behind the smiles and polished appearances, cracks had begun to spread, and Clara felt them widening with each passing day. Clara had always been a woman who demanded perfection, both of herself and of the life she built. Born in Colombia, she had come to the United States with ambition burning inside her. Dentistry had offered her a pathway not only to a career, but to the respect and security she craved. When she met David Harris, she saw more than just a partner. She saw someone who shared her drive, someone who wanted success as much as she did. Together, they were unstoppable. Patients admired them, colleagues respected them, and friends envied the life they appeared to live. Yet what Clara couldn't see, or perhaps refused to admit for too long, was that David was restless, a man whose charm and need for validation didn't stop at the boundaries of their marriage. It started with whispers in Clara's mind, little signals that something was off. David worked late more often. He became distracted at home, answering calls with an energy that suggested more than just business. His laughter seemed different when he was on the phone, lighter, like a man reliving his youth. When Clara asked him directly, his answers were evasive, brushed off with the practiced ease of a man who believed he could talk his way out of suspicion. But Clara's instincts were sharp, and when a woman's intuition begins to churn, it rarely quiets down until the truth emerges. The woman at the center of Clara's growing nightmare was Gail Bridges, a receptionist at the dental clinic. Gail wasn't a stranger. She had been around long enough that Clara knew her face, knew her presence, but she hadn't seen her as a threat. That changed when Clara noticed the way David's eyes lingered, the way he spoke of her in casual tones that held just a little too much warmth. At first, Clara tried to push the thoughts away. After all, she was David's wife, his partner, the mother figure to his daughter. Surely he wouldn't risk all of that. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed, and soon Clara couldn't shake the image of David with someone else. The decision to hire a private investigator didn't come easily. Clara was a woman who prided herself on control, and bringing in outsiders to confirm her suspicions felt like an admission of failure, as though she could not hold her marriage together on her own. But the gnawing fear inside her had grown unbearable, and she needed to know the truth. When the investigator laid out the photographs and the details, her heart broke in ways she hadn't imagined possible. There was David, the man she had given her life to, holding another woman, touching her, smiling in a way that once belonged only to Clara. The betrayal was no longer invisible. It was tangible, captured on film, undeniable. For many people, discovering infidelity brings quiet devastation. Some retreat into silence, others lash out with words, but Clara's devastation was electric, coursing through her veins like fire. She still loved David, loved him with a desperation that frightened even herself. The thought of losing him to another woman wasn't something she could calmly accept. Instead, She resolved to fight for him, to win him back, to show him that no one could replace the life they had built together. Her pain became obsession, and obsession, when mixed with humiliation, can turn into something volatile. In the days that followed, Clara oscillated between heartbreak and determination. She pleaded with David, confronted him with the evidence, demanded explanations. David admitted the affair, but he did not crumble into remorse in the way Clara had hoped. Instead, he was calm, almost cold, acknowledging what she already knew, but not offering the kind of apologies that could soothe the wound. His attitude left Clara spinning. She tried harder, offering him forgiveness, planning ways to rekindle their romance, clinging to the hope that if she fought fiercely enough, she could erase the other woman from his mind. But Gail wasn't a passing distraction anymore. She had become a part of David's world, and in Clara's mind, that was intolerable. The summer pressed on. Each day, a storm within Clara's chest. Friends noticed her unraveling, her temper shorter, her emotions rawer. Yet to the outside world, she still tried to maintain the image of a composed professional, the successful dentist and devoted wife. Appearances mattered to Clara, always had, and the idea of being humiliated publicly, of being the wife who had been cheated on, was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. She couldn't stand the thought of people whispering behind her back, of colleagues and friends pitying her. More than anything, she wanted control again. July 24th, 2002 began like an ordinary day, but carried with it the weight of inevitability. Clara knew where David was going. She had arranged for the private investigator to follow him, to document his meeting with Gail at the Hilton Hotel in Nassau Bay. When the call came, confirming their location, Clara's pulse raced. She could have chosen to stay home, to let the investigator collect his evidence, but that wasn't Clara's way. She needed to see it for herself, needed to confront the betrayal with her own eyes. So she drove, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, heartbreak, and desperate love. In the parking lot of the Hilton, the air hung heavy and thick. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the entrance, waiting. When the doors opened and David appeared, walking out with Gail beside him, time seemed to slow. The sight was both everything she had feared and everything she had known deep down for weeks. David's smile, Gail's presence, the casual intimacy of their movements. It was too much. Clara stepped out of her car, her body trembling, her heart pounding. The confrontation that erupted was raw, fueled by months of suspicion and days of confirmed betrayal. Voices rose, accusations flew, and witnesses nearby could feel the intensity of the moment. For David, the confrontation must have felt like a nightmare unfolding in public. For Gail, it was an embarrassment, being caught in the spotlight of a marriage collapsing. For Clara, it was everything, every ounce of humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak poured into a single, uncontrollable moment. The world around her blurred as her rage crystallized, and somewhere in that chaos, a line was crossed. Clara climbed back into her Mercedes-Benz, her hands shaking, her mind consumed. What happened next would transform the story from a private tragedy into a national headline, forever remembered as one of the most infamous crimes of passion in American history. The sun was beginning its slow descent over Nassau Bay, the light glinting against the polished windows of the Hilton Hotel, casting reflections that seemed almost mocking in their calm beauty. In the parking lot, however, there was no calm, only the storm that had been gathering inside Clara Harris for months. She had arrived with a knot of dread and rage in her stomach. But what she witnessed as David walked out of those hotel doors beside Gail Bridges was more than she could bear. It wasn't just that he was with her. It was the ease, the casual warmth between them. The way Gale's presence seemed to replace everything Clara thought she represented in David's life. She felt humiliated, cornered, like the ground beneath her had given way. The man she loved, the man she had built a family and a future with, was parading his mistress through the world as if Clara were invisible. And worst of all, Clara's teenage stepdaughter, Lindsay, was there with her, sitting in the car, witnessing the unraveling of her father and stepmother in real time. Clara had wanted proof, had wanted the strength of evidence to confront David. But now that she had it, the truth scorched like fire. Witnesses later recalled the moment vividly. Clara's voice carried across the parking lot as she hurled her anguish at David and Gale, words sharpened by months of betrayal. She was not a woman measured and calm. She was a wife fighting for the dignity that had been ripped from her. David tried to reason with her, his tone shifting between defensiveness and irritation, as if he were caught between two worlds he could no longer control. Gale, uncomfortable and embarrassed, attempted to step back, but the drama consumed her too. Clara lashed out, not just at David, but at the woman she saw as the thief of her life. The confrontation turned chaotic, the kind of raw scene that makes strangers stop and stare even as they feel they shouldn't. Lindsay, watching from the car, was caught in the cruelest of positions. She loved her father, adored him, but she also cared for Clara, who had stepped into her life with genuine affection. Now she sat frozen, her heart pounding, unable to understand how the people she loved had reached this moment of collapse. The fear in her young eyes would later be one of the most haunting elements of the tragedy. For Clara, humiliation gave way to something darker. Her mind, overwhelmed with betrayal, snapped into a clarity that wasn't rational but felt undeniable in that instant. She could not let David walk away with Gale, could not watch the man she had sacrificed so much for drift out of her reach into another woman's arms. Her sense of rejection, of being discarded, turned into a force stronger than reason. She slid into the driver's seat of her Mercedes-Benz, the leather cool against her trembling palms as she gripped the wheel. The decision that formed in Clara's mind wasn't spoken aloud, wasn't even fully conscious, but as she pressed her foot against the accelerator, the world around her blurred into a tunnel vision where only David remained in focus. Witnesses described the sound first, a roar of an engine cutting through the air, the kind of sound that signals danger before the eyes can confirm it. The silver Mercedes lurched forward, tires squealing, and in that split second, everything changed. David didn't have time to move. He had only moments, perhaps only a flash of recognition in his eyes, before the car struck him with brutal force. His body lifted, slammed against the hood, then crashed to the ground. Gasps and screams erupted from onlookers, their shock magnified by the realization of what had just happened. But Clara's rage had not cooled with the first impact. She circled, the car swerving, and then, in what would later be described as an unspeakable act of passion-driven violence, she drove over David again and again. The parking lot, once an ordinary space filled with cars and hotel guests, became a scene of horror. Witnesses shouted, some rushed forward only to stumble back in disbelief, others called frantically for help. Lindsay's screams pierced through the chaos, and the teenage girl pounding on the dashboard, begging her stepmother to stop. But Clara was beyond hearing. Her grief and fury had merged into something unstoppable, and all that mattered was the finality of ensuring David would never betray her again. By the time the car rolled to a stop, silence seemed to fall, but it was a silence heavy with disbelief and terror. David Harris lay lifeless on the pavement, his body broken in a way that left no doubt he was gone. Gail stood frozen, her face pale, her body trembling, as though she could not process that she had just watched a man die, watched her lover's wife take his life in front of her. The private investigator, who had been hired to capture evidence of infidelity, now held evidence of something unimaginably worse. His camera still in hand, but his purpose forever altered. For Clara, the moments after were a blur. Adrenaline still surged through her veins, but as the reality of what she had done began to sink in, fragments of clarity returned. She saw the horror on her stepdaughter's face, the lifeless form of her husband, the strangers staring at her as though she were a monster. She had wanted to fight for her marriage, to hold on to the man she loved, but in one irreversible act, she had destroyed everything. When the police arrived, the scene was already infamous in the making. They found a woman distraught, a daughter inconsolable, and a body that told the story of rage unleashed. Clara did not flee. She did not attempt to deny what had happened. She was consumed by the weight of it, repeating words that would later echo through courtrooms and headlines. She had just wanted to stop him, to stop the humiliation, to stop the betrayal. But nothing could undo what had been done. In the hours that followed, the tragedy spread like wildfire across Houston. A respected dentist, killed not in an accident, not by a stranger, but by his own wife, in a hotel parking lot. It wasn't just the violence of the act that captured attention. It was the intimacy of it, the fact that love and hate had collided in such a public, devastating way. The story resonated because it touched on fears that lived quietly in so many hearts. The fear of betrayal, the fear of being replaced, the fear of losing control in the face of heartbreak. For Lindsay, the trauma was unbearable. To lose her father was one wound. To watch him die in front of her, struck down by the woman she also loved, was something far crueler. She would carry the image with her for the rest of her life, a scar no therapy could ever fully erase. For Gail, the mistress who had unknowingly walked into the center of a storm, the experience was equally haunting. She had pursued a relationship with a married man, perhaps believing she could offer him something he longed for, but she had not foreseen the deadly consequences. Her name would be forever linked with scandal and tragedy. As Clara sat in custody that night, stripped of her freedom and her identity as the polished professional she had once been, she was left with only the echoes of her actions. She had loved David with a devotion that bordered on obsession, but in trying to keep him, she had ensured she would lose him forever. The irony was cruel, but in the raw pain of betrayal, reason had no place. The case that would soon unfold in court was not just about a crime, it was about passion, humiliation, and the razor-thin line between love and destruction. The world would soon know Clara Harris's name, and the question that lingered in every retelling was the same. Was she a cold-blooded murderer, or was she a heartbroken wife who snapped under unbearable weight? The truth, as with most tragedies, was not so simple. In the weeks after David Harris's death, Houston buzzed with a mixture of horror and fascination. What had unfolded in that hotel parking lot was more than a crime. It was a drama so intimate and so violent that people couldn't stop talking about it. Newspapers splashed Clara's photograph across their front pages. Television anchors repeated the chilling details every night, and neighbors whispered in hushed tones about the once perfect couple who had seemed to embody success. Now, the story of Clara Harris was no longer one of achievement, but of devastation, her name linked forever with betrayal and a Mercedes-Benz. From the moment police arrested her, Clara's life shifted into a blur of interrogations, legal meetings, and a suffocating media frenzy. Prosecutors prepared to argue that she had killed David in cold blood, driven not by a moment of passion, but by a calculated desire to end his life once and for all. They pointed to the repeated strikes, the circling of the car, the eyewitness accounts that left little room for doubt. This, they said, was not an accident, not a lapse, but murder. Clara's defense team, however, built a different narrative. They portrayed her as a heartbroken wife, a woman consumed by despair, humiliated and betrayed by the man she loved. They argued that her actions were not premeditated, but born out of overwhelming emotion, a crime of passion committed in the heat of an unbearable moment. Clara herself wept as she described the humiliation of seeing her husband with another woman, the desperation of trying to save her marriage, and the blinding rage that took over when she realized she had lost him. The trial in 2003 became a spectacle. Every detail was scrutinized. The photographs from the private investigator, the testimony of Lindsay, who had witnessed her father's death from inside the car, the accounts of horrified hotel guests who had seen Clara drive over David again and again. Lindsay's testimony was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Standing in the courtroom, the teenager struggled to reconcile her love for both her father and the woman who had killed him. Her words painted a portrait not only of tragedy, but of a family shattered beyond repair. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing the emotional chaos against the cold facts of the crime. In the end, they reached a decision that struck a middle ground. Clara Harris was found guilty of murder, but not capital murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. As the verdict was read, Clara wept openly, her body shaking with the realization that her life as she knew it was over. She had lost David, lost her freedom, and lost the image of herself she had so carefully crafted over the years. Prison became Clara's new reality, a world stripped of luxury, stripped of the status she had once held. Gone were the pristine dental clinics, the elegant homes, the polished cars. Instead, she wore the uniform of an inmate, ate the bland meals served in the cafeteria, and learned the routines of confinement. In those years, she had plenty of time to think, to replay the events of that July evening over and over in her mind. She spoke often of regret, of wishing she could take it back, of the deep love she had once felt for David, and the shame of what she had done. Yet even behind bars, Clara was not forgotten. Documentaries revisited her story. True crime shows replayed the footage, and her name appeared again and again as a cautionary tale of how love, betrayal, and rage can collide with devastating consequences. She became a symbol of the phrase, crime of passion. Her case studied by law students, debated by psychologists, and remembered by a public that could not look away from the horror of it. Time moved slowly in prison, but eventually the years added up. Clara served nearly 15 years before she was released on parole in 2018. When she stepped out of the prison gates, she was no longer the glamorous dentist of Houston society, but a woman who had lived through scandal, disgrace, and unimaginable loss. Reporters waited for her, eager to capture her first steps of freedom, but Clara remained quiet, her face marked by years of reflection. She had paid her debt to society, at least legally, but the debt of conscience, the weight of taking David's life, was something she would carry forever. For the people who remembered the case, her release reopened old wounds. Some argued she had served enough time. that her actions, though unforgivable, were the result of heartbreak rather than malice. Others insisted no amount of betrayal could justify what she had done, that taking a life in such a brutal way demanded a lifetime behind bars. But for Clara, the debate was irrelevant. Freedom did not bring her husband back, did not erase the trauma of Lindsay, did not undo the humiliation of Gail Bridges. It only meant she could try to live the remainder of her life outside prison walls, haunted by her choices. Looking back, the tragedy of the Harris family lies not only in the act of violence, but in everything that led to it. A marriage built on ambition and image collapsed under the weight of betrayal. A woman who wanted love and security lost everything in a single, uncontrollable moment. A daughter watched her world shatter before her eyes. And a man who had sought comfort outside his marriage paid the ultimate price. The story of Clara Harris reminds us how fragile human emotions can be, how quickly love can twist into rage, and how the line between devotion and destruction can sometimes vanish in a heartbeat. It's a story that still grips audiences today because it touches on fears and feelings that live deep within us all. The fear of being betrayed, the humiliation of being replaced, and the terrible things people are capable of when they feel they have nothing left to lose. And so, when people remember July 24th, 2002, they don't just recall a parking lot in Nassau Bay or the roar of a Mercedes engine. They remember the way betrayal can ignite fury, the way humiliation can unravel reason, and the way one woman's desperate attempt to hold on to love ended in a tragedy that could never be undone. If you've been drawn into this heartbreaking story, make sure you like this video, share it with others who follow true crime, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into cases where love,